It seems that nowadays everyone teaches multiple foot techniques and overwhelms you with made-up exercises that simply don't work. The truth is, easy does it. I only use 2 muscle groups to go from 100 to 200 beats per minute. The shift for me happens at exactly 150 BPM, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So here's exactly what we're gonna do today. I'm going to take you through 5 key tempos: 100, 125, 150, 175 and 200 BPM. For each tempo we'll follow the same simple structure. First, I start with a quick double bass demonstration. Then I tell you which muscle groups I'm activating. Third, I'll break down the exact technique I'm using at that tempo. And finally, fourth, I'll give you my best practice tips to nail that specific tempo. By the end of this, you'll have a complete roadmap from slow and controlled all the way up to 200 beats per minute, using just 2 techniques and focusing on just 2 muscle groups. No confusion, no overwhelm, just clear progression. All right, let's start with the foundation. Here's what 100 BPM looks like. All right, let's start with the foundation at 100 beats per minute. What you just saw is the so-called flat foot technique. This is going to be our bread and butter at slower tempos. Now here's the crucial part that most people get wrong. For this technique, at this tempo, I only use my hip flexor to lift my leg off the pedal or off the floor. That's it. Only focus on lifting at this tempo. Then let your heel drop back down to the floor again. There's no additional acceleration needed on the way down at this tempo. Your leg's natural rate does all the work for you. There are actually 2 different approaches to the flat foot technique that I want to show you right now. Let me demonstrate my approach first. I always want to keep a 90-degree angle between my foot and my lower leg at all times. This approach was first mentioned and explained online by Derek Roddy. Just activate your hip flexor, maintain that 90-degree angle between your lower leg and your foot. That's it. Now let me show you the Simon Schilling approach to the flat foot technique. Simon actually helped me create the flat foot technique course in our drum camp. There he's teaching this approach in detail. His technique is actually quite similar. He's also using his hip flexor to lift the weight of his leg off the floor or off the pedal, but with his approach, the front part of his foot always stays in touch with the floor. Look something like this. Just using my hip flexor. The reason why this approach is a bit more elegant in my opinion is this. When you're using this Simon Schilling approach at slower tempos, you get a smooth transition once you increase the tempo into the anchor technique. It's the exact same foot position on the footboard, just a smoother transition. The transition from the flat foot technique that I'm using can feel a bit disrupted when switching to the anchor technique. Now there are definitely more details to dive into with both of these approaches. If you want to learn more about this and you're a member of Marthyn's drum camp already, you can find everything you need in part 1 and part 2 of our flat foot technique course. We go much deeper into the nuances there. One mistake that I see happening quite often with our students is this. When first starting out with the Simon Schilling approach like this, chances are high that if you are not careful and not mindful while practicing, you'll also start to activate your calf muscle to raise your heel. So always remember that you just want to use your hip flexor at these tempos. Keep it simple. Now let's put this to a test. Can you see the difference between this approach and now this approach? Looks quite similar, but for the first demonstration I was using just my hip flexor, and for the second demonstration right now I'm just using my calf. Another thing that I want you to be aware of is to try to stay balanced. You don't want to lean back when playing with both feet. If you have balance issues and find yourself having to lean back as soon as you start to play with both feet, then try sitting a bit further back on your drum stool actually. This way, more of the weight of your upper leg is supported by the drum stool and it's easier to stay balanced. To finish this 100 BPM section, I want to add a practice tip. Endurance is the key element and the key factor right here. Play for long periods of time without stopping to train your hip flexors. You want to increase your endurance in that specific muscle group drastically. So it's perfectly fine to add a 5-minute double bass run either at the beginning or at the end of your practice session. Think of it like going to the gym. You're building up those hip flexor muscles through consistent, sustained practice. All right, now that we've got the foundation locked in at 100 BPM, let's move up to 125. Right now, we basically use the exact same technique as before. Flat foot technique, same muscle group. Focusing on lifting your full leg off the floor or off the pedal by using your hip flexor. But before we continue, let me tell you a story that actually changed everything I knew about double bass drumming. Picture this. It's the year 2009. I am 22 years old, barely experienced, and I just got the call of a lifetime. I got the chance to play live shows for the Austrian metal band Belphegor. And after 2 years of playing shows together, they asked me to play drums on their upcoming record. Not just to play live shows, actually record the album as well. Before me, they always used the same 2 legendary session drummers for their records. So when they asked me, I was excited, but I was also absolutely terrified. The session was booked at Abyss Studios in Sweden, Peter Tägtgrens' legendary studio, the guy behind Hypocrisy and Pain. No pressure, right? So, for 3 weeks leading up to the recording session, we practiced like maniacs. 2 sessions a day, 2 to 3 hours each. At that point, I knew every song by heart. My hands were tied, my feet were locked in for the fast stuff. I felt ready. And then disaster struck. Just 3 weeks before the actual recording, my slow double bass completely fell apart. And here's what happened. Belphegor is known for these insane endurance blast beats. The fastest song of that record, titled Angelis Mortis de Profundis, was at 254 BPM. For those 2-foot blast beats, back then I was using what most drummers actually use, the heel up technique, mixing upper and lower leg, mainly hip flexor and calves. But here's the problem nobody talks about. Your calf muscles have incredible endurance. Use them every day, walking, running. They are built to last. But your hip flexors, they are not used to that kind of punishment. After weeks of intense practice, my hip flexors were completely fried. And every time I started to count in a fast song, something terrifying happened. My upper legs would actually tense up uncontrollably. My calves would take over and speed up way beyond what I wanted. I couldn't play controlled 16 notes at 170 BPM anymore. My feet were either dead or flying out of control. It was a drummer's nightmare. But here's what saved me. I did the hardest thing possible at the time. I took a complete week off. No drumming, no sports, nothing. Just recovery. So when I finally came back after 1 week, I could play again. Recording session was amazing. We actually nailed Angelis Profundis in just 1 take. But I also knew I had dodged a bullet. That experience taught me an important lesson about double bass drumming. If you neglect to develop your hip flexor endurance, you'll hit a wall exactly where most drummers struggle. That 125 to 150 BPM range where control matters most. And that's when I was incredibly lucky once again because I discovered Derek Roddy and his flat foot technique. He's living proof for how far you can push this one muscle group when you train it properly. And this is one of the main reasons why we don't recommend using your calf muscles at those slow tempos like 125 beats per minute. Without building up your hip flexor endurance, your calves will take over when you get tired every single time. Now let me compare those 2 muscle groups for you, the calf muscle and the hip flexor muscle group. The calf muscle is actually quite strong and has amazing endurance right from the get-go. The reason is that we basically use them all the time. There's a lot of demand on that muscle group every day when we are walking and running. In comparison to that, we are not used to lift in our legs so rapidly in a sitting position. That's exactly what we are trying to do when playing double bass at those tempos. So in order to make this work, we have to increase the endurance of our hip flexor. If not, then the following will happen. When you play double bass and you combine upper and lower leg, which is the basic heel up technique, by the way, when you combine upper and lower leg and really push your limits, practicing for long periods of time, then at a certain point, and for beginners, sooner rather than later, your hip flexor will be completely exhausted. The problem is that at this exact point in time, your calf muscle will want to take over. Your body is actually just looking for a solution to this problem. So your body is trying to keep on playing double bass while this one muscle group is already completely exhausted. And when this happens, when your body shifts to using your calves mainly, that's when some of those problems that many drummers already know occur. These problems are, and I want to ask you right now if this sounds familiar. At around 125 or 130 BPM, they lose control of the footboard. They speed up unintentionally, so they can't really play tight to the click anymore. Their weak foot is not able to keep up at mid-tempos, also an indicator for a weak hip flexor. They involuntarily lean back when playing at those tempos. All of these are just symptoms of the same problem. The hip flexor is not trained properly. For example, when you find yourself leaning back, it might not even be just a balance issue. We also tend to lean back when we are exhausted, when we have exhausted our hip flexor actually. Leaning back helps your tired hip flexor to keep on going just a little bit longer. It's already an indicator that this one muscle group is completely tired. You know, back in the days, and I'm already 39 years old, turning 40 next year. Back in the days, 20 or 30 years ago, the two basic techniques drummers were using were the heel up and the heel down technique. The heel up technique was basically using a mix of upper and lower leg. Perfect example of an amazing drummer that's using the regular heel up technique is Igor Cavalera. Watch his videos on YouTube so you see a perfect demonstration of the regular heel up technique. But nowadays, drum teachers who try to overcomplicate things have a new name for the heel up technique. So now it's not called heel up anymore. They call it the hybrid technique, indicating that they're using a mix of upper and lower leg. This adds even more to the confusion that's happening online already. One more story that I want to add right here is this. I've heard it quite often from drummers that when they first started playing double bass, they were able to basically just sit down and play at around 150 BPM with ease. They were basically just placing their feet on the pedal, using the regular heel up technique. They were basically actually just running on the pedals. Then at a certain point, as they actually improve, they suddenly lose control and they are not able to play at these tempos anymore. The reason is this. When you spend more time playing double bass, at a certain point, your body will get used to the action of your bass drum pedals. You will get more efficient when playing your pedals. More efficient, especially when you push the tempo and include your lower legs more, means using especially your calf muscle. It's a great thing for higher tempos, but at lower tempos, this causes immense problems because your body always wants to shift to this lower leg muscle group. And for all of you that are struggling with this, just continuing to use a mix of upper and lower leg is not going to help you. Your hip flex endurance will not be developed properly. Your calf muscle will want to do the majority of the work, even at slower tempos. This is not going to help you play at those slow tempos. The easier, straightforward approach here is to just use this one muscle group, your hip flexor. Now, one little extra tip that I want to mention right here. If you increase the tempo a bit further, just 130 and 135 BPM, there's one more thing that's happening. What's happening is this. At around 135 BPM, you will find that you're not only lifting the weight of your leg off the floor or the pedal anymore. On the way down, you will also find yourself accelerating to make sure that you can keep up with the tempo. So at those higher tempos, we don't just focus on lifting our leg and then let it drop back down to the floor again. We focus on lifting our leg, but then we accelerate on the way down. If you're sitting higher, just like me on the drum chair, after a long practice session, you will really feel this actually in your glutes. This is the acceleration on the way down. Now let me show you the difference once again, first at a slower tempo around 110 and then 135. Now we want to finish this 125 BPM section with a practice tip. Again, go for long endurance runs. 5 minutes of non-stop double bass, just using your hip flexor to build up that endurance. An additional extra tip, if you want to challenge yourself further at those tempos, it's fine to add in some ankle weights. For our students, 1.5 to 2 kilogram ankle weights, 2 kilogram per leg is what has worked best. At a specific weight, especially starting at around 3 kilograms or 4 kilograms, it just becomes redundant. It just becomes too heavy and we're not really getting any added benefits anymore from this heavier workout. All right, that covers our 125 foundation. Now let's jump up to the critical transition point, 150 beats per minute. At 150 beats per minute, I'm actually switching to the ankle technique. As a quick side note, I want to mention that when first learning the ankle technique, it's actually a bit easier to play at a higher tempo like 170 or 180 BPM. It seems to be the starting tempo for most drummers who first learn this technique. And then, once this is solid, you work your way down the BPM ladder to 150. That's what I did. It worked really well for me. So please be aware, 150 is a bit more difficult than 170 or 180 beats per minute with this technique. Also, as an alternative, I want to tell you that many of our students in Marthyn's drum camp actually still use the flat foot technique at this exact tempo. They are working their way up the BPM ladder with the flat foot technique to around 160 or 170 BPM. Only then they switch to the actual ankle technique. Now let's talk about the muscle groups we are using with this technique. Actually, it's super simple. You only want to focus on actively engaging your calf muscle to lift your heel. That's it. Really important right here is that you also want to relax your upper leg at the same time. So the weight of your leg has to be on the pedals for this technique to work. If you contract your hip flexor and take the weight of your leg off the pedal, then my approach to the ankle technique will not work. So here are two key elements when playing at 150 with the ankle technique. Number one, foot position on the footboard. For this tempo, we've got to move our feet all the way to the backhand of the footboard for this to work. And number two, pedal settings have to be in place. The most important setting right here for this to work is the beta angle. Beta angle should be around 45 degrees. If you're using a smaller beta angle like 20 or 30 degrees, so closer to the bass drum head or pad, then you're not going to be able to get such a full big beta swing. This allows you to slow down with the ankle technique to 150 beats per minute. So now let's talk about the main exercise to develop a feel for this technique. And actually, it's really simple. All you need to develop the ankle technique, especially for those tempos below 200 BPM, is one simple workout, which we like to call the bounce workout. And here's how it works. All you got to do is remove the bass drum or the practice pad. Then place your foot on the footboard. First, start out with the position that's most comfortable around the sweet spot of your pedals. Then, just start by lifting your heel by contracting your calf muscle. Make sure that your upper leg is relaxed at all times. And then, start bouncing the beta back and forth as quickly as possible. For those of you who are already members at Marthyn's Drum Camp, you can find the bounce workout and all the additional necessary information in part 1 and part 2 of our ankle technique course. To finish this, I want to give you a quick practice tip regarding the bounce workout. Once you have developed a basic feel for the bounce workout and the beta swing, you can repeat this exercise right here for long periods of time. It's perfectly fine to practice for 20 or 30 minutes with each foot separately. It's not going to be exhausting. Actually, it's quite easy if your pedal is set up correctly. As long as you make sure that you relax your upper leg, really careful and mindful about that, and you just use your calf muscle to lift your heel. So now that we've covered the critical 150 BPM transition, let's move up to 175 beats per minute. First, great news, we use the exact same technique, the ankle technique, just as we did at 150 BPM. And there's only one simple difference between the two tempos: my foot position on the footboard. When we increase the tempo from 150 to 175, we move our foot a little bit further to the front. That's it. Funnily enough, 175 is easier to control than 150. That's why this tempo is actually a better and easier starting tempo for everyone who's learning the ankle technique. Next, I want to give you a quick demonstration regarding the foot position. So I'm going to play from 150 to 175. And please pay close attention to how I'm slowly sliding my foot more to the front of the footboard. Starting at 150. Now 155. 160. 165. 170. And 175. Also be aware that when I'm moving my foot to the front of the footboard, to make sure that the beta swing is consistent, I'm going to move my heel a little bit from side to side like this. This is just to be able to keep the beta swing going while moving my foot further to the front. Be aware that this is not the swivel technique. That's just me changing the position on the footboard to slowly move my foot more to the front. That's it. The best exercise to develop this tempo. Once again, really simple, really easy, just the bounce workout. There's no need for made-up workout routines. Just the bounce workout is more than enough to develop a feel for this technique. Also, no need to place a pool noodle under your heel or any other crazy routines that YouTube drum teachers are coming up with nowadays. Next, I want to show you a YouTube screenshot from a comment that someone posted underneath one of my videos. I'm going to read it out loud. Comment goes like this: can you do a video about fast involuntary twitching instead of a constant beta swing? I have problems with that in my right leg since years and I can't get rid of it, even when I practice the motion without a pad for weeks like you suggested. So, first of all, thank you so much for your comment. Actually, this problem is quite common for drummers, especially with their leading foot. Here's the reason. When drummers are practicing or playing with their main leading foot almost all the time, their left foot, this one, is basically just on the floor or on the other pedal, acting as a human kickstand. So when this happens, we basically train ourselves to use a steady contraction of our hip flexor with the main leg because we are balanced with this one. We are taking some of the weight of our leg off the pedal, and this kind of motion is actually causing this involuntary twitching. So to the commenter, I want to say thank you for watching my videos. It's great that you practice the motion without a pad for weeks, but actually you didn't really follow my guidelines, because my guidelines always were and still are: just use your calf muscle. Your upper leg has to be completely relaxed for this to work. Another additional tip for you, Iron's Village, is this: try experimenting with different pedal settings, especially your beta angle. A small change to your pedal settings can make a huge difference when learning the ankle technique. You got this, my friend. In my last video, I actually talked a lot about the differences between the ankle technique that I'm using and the ankle technique that other teachers out there are teaching. As you know, I'm not the one who gets to decide what the ankle technique is and what it isn't. But it's pretty clear at this point that the approach that I'm using is completely different. With my approach to the ankle technique, we are only focusing on lifting our heels. For this approach, I don't recommend practicing heel down. I don't recommend practicing this exercise where you lift your full leg and just move your foot freely like this. This incorporates your hip flexor, your calf, and your shin muscle. I recommend none of that. I also want to briefly mention that this one exercise, lifting your foot off the floor and just flicking your ankle is actually terrible when it comes to my approach to the ankle technique. The reason is, when you do this, you actually train yourself to use a static contraction in your hip flexor and take the weight off the pedal. This is something that we never want to do with my approach. You also train yourself to focus on pushing down with your toes instead of focusing on lifting your heels. From time to time, I've seen this in the past as well. Some of my students try to learn my approach and also try to follow the advice given by other teachers on YouTube at the same time. Their advice was practicing heel down, removing the spring of your bass drum pedal, adding in countless useless, counterproductive exercises like the one where you lift your full leg off the floor and you're just flicking your ankle. This only adds to the confusion. So I have to tell you, when you try to learn both approaches at the same time, you will most likely fail. I've talked enough about the differences of these two techniques and why I don't use the other approach that the other teachers are teaching. And I covered all of this in a YouTube video. So I'm going to link it somewhere here in the top corner of this video. Now let me give you some practice tips to improve at 175 BPM. At this tempo, you don't really need to focus on endurance when practicing. The pedals do most of the work for us if the pedal settings are correct. So actually, it's really easy to play at this tempo for long periods of time. So instead of long endurance runs, I recommend focusing on clean transitions between eighth notes and 60 notes at these tempos, or focus on shorter double bass patterns. These two will help you improve your control and your tightness at those tempos. All right, we are getting close to our final destination. Let's push it to 200 beats per minute. Great news again, no need to change technique. We are still using the ankle technique 100% the way that I define it. And actually, we just need one small little tweak to get from 175 to 200 BPM. You guessed it right. We've got to move our foot a little bit further to the front of the footboard again. That's it. Now here's a quick demonstration of me starting at 175 and slowly moving my foot further to the front until I arrive at 200 beats per minute. One 80, 185, 190, 195, 200. At this tempo, especially if you start to struggle with the speed and it becomes a bit too fast, really focus on just lifting your heels. If necessary, look down at your feet, just focus on your heels. Constantly focus on lifting your heels while your upper leg is relaxed at all times. Don't try to push down with your toes. This approach gives you less speed, less endurance, especially at higher tempos. Now let's talk about workout routines. First of all, endurance workouts are back. At 175, I recommended to actually skip endurance workouts, but at 200 BPM, you want to add them in again. So it's perfectly fine to practice for 5 minutes straight, 60-note double bass drumming non-stop at 200 BPM. And the reason is, at 175, our pedals are doing most of the work for us. But at 200 BPM, we have to work a little harder and a little more to keep up the beater swing, keep the beater swing going at that tempo. This is especially true if you're using a regular chain-driven pedal. This just takes a bit more work than a high-end belt drive or especially a direct drive pedal. So with this pedal, which costs around 80 to 90 euros, that's the cheapest pedal available here in Austria, I have to add in some extra work to keep the beater swing going at 200 BPM. Next, I recommend focusing on control exercises with each foot separately. This could be simple patterns like this one. Also, you can focus on transitions, switching from eighth notes to 60 notes again at that tempo. To finish this, I want to give you one final tip about the starting and stopping position. We have to call a spade a spade. The truth is, the anchor technique also has its downsides. One of the downsides is that the starting and stopping is actually more difficult with the anchor technique than, for example, with the flat foot technique. The reason is, with the anchor technique, to start in time, you have to bring your foot in position to start in time. We do this with what we like to call the pre-tension. So we are going to raise our heels again, just using our calf muscle. The beta starts to travel towards the bass drum head. Actually, it should stop right before the bass drum head, or the pad in this case. This is our starting position. I'm actually not able to start with the anchor technique in time when my heels are on the ground like this. I need to raise them to start playing in time. When it comes to stopping in time, right here you got two possibilities. The first possibility to stop in time, and I demonstrated this right now already, is to just let your heel drop back down to the floor again. Looks like this. This is the simplest way to stop in time with the anchor technique. The second variation is actually what I use when I know that I have to start playing right away again after stopping. Then you don't have enough time to let your heels drop back down to the floor. So what I do in this case is basically I'm using the same position as my starting position. So when I stop, I just keep my heel raised by a static contraction of my calf muscle. This way I'm staying in this ready position and I can start again right away. This is especially useful for quicker patterns. Now, to finish this video, I want to thank everyone for watching my content. I don't have as many viewers on YouTube, so your support and you watching my videos means a lot to me. And actually, within a couple of months, this YouTube video right here will generate another $80 of revenue. With that money, I can buy another one of these extremely cheap pedals. And actually, they don't feel bad at all. It's just that they fall apart pretty easily. So this would be the third time that I'm ordering one of these pedals. I'm again thankful that you're watching my content. If you want my personal feedback on your progress, then join us at Marthyn's Drum Camp. We launched officially actually just 3 weeks ago and already have more than 100 drummers in our community. All of them practicing, all of them improving consistently. And I would love to welcome you as well. The price is still lower than $100 for a full month of access to all of our tutorials and personal coaching by me. So thanks so much for watching. I wish you a great day. Cheers from Vienna. Bye bye.